this from 1760 up to the early 1770s, a surge in the popularity of masked balls took London by storm. The aristocratic and fashionable classes were caught in a whirlwind of pageantry and extravagance. Those without the means to attend these lavish entertainments could enjoy salacious accounts in the London press, which revelled in describing the outlandish behaviour of the upper classes. Above all, these entertainments were a gift for the satirists. As you will see, almost all the prints in this show are satirical, and it seems that Georgian London loved to laugh at masqueraders. At the very centre of this extravagant pageantry was Carlisle House in Soho Square, the establishment of a lady who went by the name Mrs. Cornelys. Teresa Cornelys was a Venetian opera singer, actress and celebrated courtesan. She reportedly had a string of famous and influential lovers, including Casanova, to whom she bore a daughter. She arrived in London in 1759, hoping to revive her theatrical career in the West End. However, failing to meet with the success she anticipated, she planned a new enterprise to open assembly rooms offering entertainments by subscription. Having successfully charmed a number of rich aristocratic patrons who would back her in this venture, she finally rented Carlisle House with a sum of £180 per annum and opened assembly rooms in 1760. Tickets were paid in advance and were only available to a select group by private subscription. This ticket for a masked ball was to admit either one gentleman or two ladies at the cost of 5 guineas. Initially, the assembly rooms hosted select gatherings for dancing, card parties and gambling. They were well attended, and her success encouraged her to extend these entertainments. Soon she was hosting concerts, balls and masquerades. In 1761 she commissioned an extension to the premises to include a large ballroom. As you can see from this print of Carlisle House, it looks extremely utilitarian and unremarkable from the outside. However, by all reports, the inside of the building was awe-inspiring to behold. Extravagantly furnished with flowers and chandeliers and containing a huge dining room with a crescent-shaped table that seated 400. The opulence of the grand ballroom drew an overwhelming number of guests. In 1770, Fanny Burney attended a ball there at the age of 18 and wrote the following account. The magnificence of the rooms, splendour of the illuminations and embellishments, and the brilliant appearance of the company exceeded anything I ever before saw. She did, however, go on to say that it was too crowded to move, and that marred her enjoyment of the evening. From this image here, I think you can tell what she means. Carlisle House was established as a fashionable place to be, thronging with people of wealth and a taste for extravagance, including peers, royalty and the aristocracy. However, the height of masquerade favour came with the visit of Christian VII, the King of Denmark, in 1768. This flamboyant and extravagant young king became the darling of fashionable London society, and his taste for masquerade balls placed him at the pinnacle of the social calendar. This image shows a masque at Carlisle House held by the King of Denmark himself. The success of these balls was a phenomenon. For over a decade they held a magnetic fascination for fashionable London society. The revels started late at night and continued into the early hours of the morning, with supper being served in the dining halls around midnight. One of the obvious attractions of wearing disguise is the opportunity it affords to subvert social norms and play the part of a different person. It's not very surprising, therefore, that some accounts mention cross-dressing at these balls and accuse them of encouraging homosexuality. This image, titled Remarkable Characters at Mrs. Cornelys' Masquerade, illustrates the variety and inventiveness of the costumes. Perhaps the most eye-catching is the person on the far left, dressed in a coffin. There is also a nun, a monk, a harlequin, and someone playing the hurdy-gurdy and leading a bear. Not to mention the pot-bellied gentleman at the back, who appears to be wearing a hat, and nothing else. Masquerades were commonly depicted as a setting for crimes of intrigue and stealth. Cover of disguise provided the opportunity for all sorts of misdemeanours, and the press was rife with stories of heated quarrels and dastardly crimes committed after dark. These balls also drew considerable criticism for the opportunities they offered for sexual inhibition and erotic exhibitionism, particularly for women. One of the most scandalously licentious ladies to grace the London gossip columns was Elizabeth Chudleigh, shown here dressed as the character of Iphigenia from classical Greek mythology. It is clear from the drawing that her state of undress is drawing considerable male attention, which she seems to be receiving with blithe good humour. Elizabeth Chudleigh was an important figure in the fortunes of Mrs. Cornelys, being among the first aristocrats to back her enterprises and help promote her in high society. She was later convicted for bigamy, confirming her status as one of the most scandalous ladies of Georgian society. Masquerades provided the perfect opportunity to dress in extravagant costume, and there are a number of images showing people preparing for these balls. One group of young men particularly associated with masquerades were the macaronis, here represented by the effeminate young man with the impish expression shown posing before his mirror. Macaronis have been described as the playboys of their time and were generally represented as young, vain, degenerate pests, indulging in drink, duelling, and generally disrupting the rules of a well-ordered society. The name macaroni derived from the circumstance that many of them had travelled to Italy, where they supposedly cultivated a predilection for decadent continental tastes, such as pasta. The best musicians were engaged to play at Carlisle House, including John Sebastian Bach, son of Johann Sebastian, and Carl Friedrich Abel, an early friend and mentor of Mozart. Mrs. Cornelys blithely ignored all licensing rules and regulations that stood in her way, and thanks to her many influential friends she seemed to get away with it. In 1771 she started up a new series of operatic performances without bothering to first apply for a royal licence. These performances were known as the harmonic meetings, and they were semi-staged costume productions, as shown in this image. I would personally love to know which opera is being staged here. There seem to be an alarming number of animal heads, not to mention the fact that the conductor has a cat and an owl perched on his shoulder. A monkey is playing the drums, and a rather manic-looking cat is on the fiddle. It must have been quite a show. This time, however, Mrs. Cornelys had pushed her luck too far. It was illegal to stage opera without a royal licence, and the popularity of these performances provoked her competitors in the London opera houses to bring a complaint before Bow Street magistrates. This proved a turning point in Mrs. Cornelys' fortunes. Despite all her manoeuvrings, the complaint succeeded, and she was fined £50 for unlicensed exhibition of a dramatic performance. More difficulties would follow, and from then on she became locked in a series of expensive legal wranglings over licences and complaints about the conduct of her guests. The social success and popularity of Mrs. Cornelys' entertainments had rarely translated into financial profit, and she was consistently in debt and harassed by creditors. The money she received in subscriptions never covered the extravagant sums she spent on entertainments and furnishings, and to add to these troubles came the threat of competition as new assembly rooms opened up in London. The biggest blow to her fortune was the rising success of the Pantheon. The Pantheon was designed by James Wyatt and opened in Oxford Street in January 1772. It was by all accounts spectacular. The main rotunda was one of the largest rooms built in England and had a central dome reminiscent of the celebrated Pantheon in Rome. Mrs. Cornelys' response was to spend ever more exorbitant sums in refurbishing Carlisle House in the hopes of winning her patrons back with a promise of even greater opulence. The weight of her debt finally overcame her, and she was declared bankrupt in December 1772, and Carlisle House was sold to her creditors. Following the sale of the house, Mrs. Cornelys was granted an annuity and retained for a while to continue organising events at the house. But she never regained the success she had enjoyed in her heyday, and the crowds she drew were very small in comparison. With the failure of Carlisle House to recapture its early success and lure back the crowds, a new sobriety descended upon the establishment. This is exemplified by the fact that it came to host a debating society supervised by a clergyman called the School of Eloquence. As the fortune of Carlisle House sunk, so did that of Mrs. Cornelys. Despite attempting many schemes of recovery, she never regained her position of eminence and was left almost destitute. As the story draws to a close, I would like to show you a couple of images of the lady herself. The first, seen here, is a rather unflattering cartoon by Philippe Jacques de Lotherberg, which seems rather at odds with reports of her glamour and charm. The second one shows her in an administrative role, attended by her secretary at Carlisle House. In later life, she was repeatedly in and out of debtors' prisons, and Gentleman's Magazine reported that she was observed herding asses in Knightsbridge and selling the milk. She died in Fleet Prison on the 19th of August 1797. Her obituary in Gentleman's Magazine describes her as a distinguished priestess of fashion.